as American workers were struggling to provide for their families, a judge agreed with us and said, "You're right. In the history of our nation, this is unprecedented, breathtaking, and authoritarian." And here we are again in less than a week, pushing back on this administration who has taken action which shows it recognizes no bounds to its power. They are using OSHA and an emergency rule given to OSHA to enact widespread health care policy on American workers. Just months ago, this is the same administration that said it was not the role of the federal government to enact such a sweeping policy. Traditionally, the health and welfare of its people has been reserved to the states, but not under this administration. But when this president grew angry and lost his patience and said that unvaccinated Americans were killing others, he decided to violate the restriction of his powers through our Constitution and impose his will because he was angry on American workers. As the Attorney General of Florida, who has vowed to not only protect the citizens of the state, its workers, but the interests and the sovereignty of the state of Florida, I will file suit. As soon as this rule is published, we'll be in court. We've read what has been put forth in the public. You've seen what it takes to do a crafty workaround, and we won't stand for it. OSHA has never used its authority like this, and it's absurd. This rule requires employees to get vaccinated or be weekly tested and wear a face covering. I've already heard from employers that this will affect numerous employees, some up to 35%. They're desperate to hold on to a crucial workforce. Some have said this will cost their businesses millions. We are filing jointly with the states of Georgia and Alabama, as well as other organizations, and we will push back against the use by OSHA using an emergency temporary standard as opposed to a regular rulemaking process to impose such sweeping health care policy. Governor DeSantis and I have worked hand in hand throughout this challenge, and we will continue to do so. This action is completely unprecedented by a federal government, and we must take this action to protect Florida, its businesses, our workers, from the heavy-handed, short-sighted, and unlawful edicts that are emanating from President Biden and his handlers. Again, he has absolutely no power to enact this emergency standard. It's not what Congress intended when they created OSHA, and it's not a lawful use of the Department of Labor. We have repeatedly seen this president ignore separation of powers, ignore constraints on his authority, and the states must act to stand up against these actions. We will never allow a president to flippantly abandon the rule of law. We cannot. It sets us down a dangerous path in a democracy. This will have devastating economic effects on Florida's businesses, on its workers, just as we are experiencing historic supply chain challenges. And while this administration wants you to think that this is lawful and an emergency, which is why they are cramming this down the throats of Americans using unlawful actions to do so, and agencies that were never intended to address this situation, they're giving everyone until January 4th, just past the holidays. which I'm sure is intended not to disrupt or make even worse supply chain issues that rest solely with this administration's policy. We will not let this administration run roughshod over the freedoms of Americans. And we appreciate you being here today to allow us to get this message out to Floridians and other Americans who will be so drastically impacted by this unlawful mandate. We will continue to work tirelessly. We will continue to push back, and I'm so grateful for the support and the efforts of Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis as we work to do so. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
General, you keep saying unlawful, unconstitutional. Can you just explain for people sitting at home, because OSHA is the body that makes rules for workplaces, right? So can you explain exactly for people at home why this would be unlawful?
Well, first let's start with the fact they're not even using the normal rulemaking process. They're saying this is an emergency, and so we're going to cut through all of the normal safeguards and protocols because this is an emergency. OSHA was set up to deal with workplace situations, and in fact, when you're regulating the workplace, it's supposed to prevent against grave danger for chemicals, for other types of workplace situations, not a general health policy or a mandate and using an agency to force that on the American worker. Any other questions?
General, how would a Florida worker who's unvaccinated go into, say, Georgia, where they require vaccines? How do you envision that working? I'm not clear on if Florida doesn't have that and you prevail and get the OSHA regulations to not be in effect in Florida, how would that work if there's people transferring goods across the state line, for instance?
Well, it's a great question. I'm not quite sure I understand the exact nature of your question, but I will say there is the vaccine mandates that Washington is seeking to apply to the majority of American workers would apply across state lines. What we're saying is OSHA was never given the authority by Congress to be used to enact a general health care policy like this on American workers using that agency to do so. That was never intended. It's not lawful. So what President Biden is doing and using that agency is unprecedented and would be a complete overreach if allowed to stand.
So you'd be in favor if it was just done in a different manner of having workers somehow vaccinated and ensuring that my coworker is vaccinated?
I will tell you traditionally, and again, this is not, and I want to be clear, and this is important, this is not anti-vaccine. This is pro-freedom, pro-autonomy of an American worker. And I know that this president scoffed at that on national television when he said, what are you going to say? I can't do this? Oh, freedom? I mean, he can laugh about freedom, but I will always fiercely protect it. And the federal government does not have the authority to impose this type of health care policy and this mandate as a whole reserve the right to control and lead in our states as to particular issues. And we want to do that here in Florida. And so as I said, I will protect Floridians. I will also stand up for the rights and the interests. Thank you so much for joining us. And I know that the governor will be addressing the media shortly.
Can we just ask you a quick question about